So we're just waiting for the tally of the collection to know if this sermon should be... They just signaled to me that it is a 15 to 20 minute sermon, so appreciate that. A text today from Matthew 4, verses 1 to 3. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil, and after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. And a tempter came and said to him, you can read the rest on your own. But the point of that is 40 days and 40 nights. That number repeated 146 times in the Bible. Moses, 40 years, Jonah and Elijah, 40 days in the wilderness or in the belly of the fish. And Jesus, 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness. The number 40 in the Bible points to a time of testing or trial or probation, a time of pause or mourning, a time when the character in the story steps back and isolates himself or herself and tries to find some resources, some spiritual resources. The same is true throughout the world. Whether it was 40 days and 40 nights, the exile into the wilderness, the Buddha leaves the palace. The Taoists traveling through the land of Japan, the pilgrims in India, in Hinduism, travel through the wilderness, a time of trial and testing. And that notion of wandering in the wilderness is a notion that we find in Lent, which is the time in the church where we are right now, between the day in which we put ashes on some foreheads here and Easter morning. Sure, it's a traditional idea in Christianity, and we don't really care. We don't care that it is a traditional notion. What we care about is what it means. No, I don't think that necessarily that Jesus, who was a man, I believe, went into the wilderness and had a conversation with the tempter, etc. I do believe the story, the metaphor, has meaning, as usual. In the ancient world, wandering in the wilderness was only for those who were unhinged, either unhinged from their families and their communities or unhinged in their minds. They were literally lost. They were in exile. Some were outcast. You know, even in the medieval world, there were exiles, and those people were not allowed back into the villages or the towns where they were from. And so they were put in an extreme situation of danger. They were being tested. Some never recovered. That dangerous situation in the wilderness, some know from being in the wilderness. Or all you have to do is go see the film The Revenant, and you'll get an idea just how dangerous being wandering in the wilderness can be. But in that beautiful and brutal movie, also how important that struggle is. If you take that film out of a historical context and you use it as metaphor, you see that wandering in the wilderness, the brutality experience, the experience of that lostness was also an emotional, spiritual journey, as it was for the Buddha and the traveling Taoists and the pilgrims in Hinduism and Jonah and Moses and Elijah and Jesus. We see that kind of wandering in the wilderness in the news too. The immigrants from Syria travel paths of wilderness through nations, a different kind of wandering, with moments or glimmers of encounters with lifeboats or scams or death. We can only imagine those of us who are safe at home. But each passage a human life, each passage also a metaphor for those of us who watch on from relative safety. But we also wander. We are also wanderers. Some of us have wandering eyes for various things, from lust to desire. Some of us just feel lost. I can't tell you how many people come to my office and say, "I just feel lost." Some of us wander around the house. Why did I go in there? The older my teenagers get, the more I wonder what I'm doing in my house. I try to wander outside as far as I can, but I just keep coming back. Wonder and wandering are from different roots, but they feel the same to me. Because many of us wander through our spiritual lives pursuing a kind of wonder, pursuing a kind of knowledge, answers to questions that are common in the spiritual world. And it brings me to the Lenten proposition, 40 days of contemplation, 40 days of meditation, 40 days of wandering in the wilderness means that this is a period of time, maybe false, maybe useful, maybe not, but it's bookended period of time in which we can deliberately contemplate our spiritual lives. And we use this time, some of us, to deprive ourselves of some things. Yes, I've now had a few weeks of no sugar, and I feel that. But that deprivation just magnifies in some ways the spiritual questions that I am asking. And that spiritual question is most frequently, who are we? Because the question, who are we, is the question that leads us to a deeper search for the reality of who we are walking through this world. Who are we was answered by René Descartes. You will remember from Philosophy 101, I think, therefore I am. I know that's not true. It just can't be true, just to think and therefore you are. I feel like he is missing out on some notion of experience. I am, therefore I am. I wonder for Descartes that if he wandered into a restaurant and the waiter said, "Would you like a drink, sir?" And he said, "I think not," what would happen? Did he disappear? Who are we? Not just our thoughts. Now, I saw a stone, it was etched recently. It said, "Bad artists imitate and great artists steal, Pablo Picasso." And then Pablo Picasso's name was scratched out, and underneath it said Banksy. So I thought I would borrow from Henry Nouwen. Henry Nouwen was an openly gay Dutch celibate Catholic priest. He died in 1996, and he, at the end of his career, was a minister at L'Arche. It's a community in Canada that served differently able, both mentally unstable and physically differently abled people. I've been reading Henry Nouwen for a long time. And in a famous sermon of his, he tried to respond to the question, who are we? And I want to borrow from him right now. I want to tell you what he said. He said, we walk through our lives thinking that we are what we do. That the things we do, the work we do, the chores we do, the daily routines are who we are. But what happens when we can't? Or when we don't? He said, we walk around thinking that we are what people say about us, which is lovely when they say great things about us. Very kind things make us feel like we are who we are. But when someone says something not so nice about us, then that challenges that notion that we are who other people say we are. I don't know about you, but people have said bad things of me, and it hurts and it stays with me. But to latch on to that is a mistake. And he said, we often think that we are what we have. The homes, the clothes, the families, the cars that we drive. But what happens when we lose those things? That answer in the extreme spoken of in the book of Job. A man who loses everything. Now and says our energy in these questions of what we do, what people say of us, and what we have is like a roller coaster that we're just riding along. And the more we attach onto it, the more ups and downs our lives are. His answer is that we are beloved. We are not what we do. We are not what people say. We are not what we have, but we are God's beloved children, which I believe from the depth of my heart. But I don't think that's the only thing that we are. And it brings us to today's reading that Kathleen read. I think we are seeds of hope. I think that we are hope in our being, not in our doing. That we encourage each other with wisdom, with little bits of affection or little bits of compassion or generosity or cheer. That we are both beloved and we are a seed of hope in how we are being in the world. I believe that we are also hope in the hopes of others. That no matter how isolated we get, no matter how lost we feel, no matter how lonely it is to walk through the world, we are always related. We are always in community, and therefore we are the hope for others. Even others we don't know. And we are also hope beyond our ownership. I can't tell you how many times I've said this in sermons. You are not what lasts in the things you own when you leave. I have stood in this pulpit many times now and spoken of the dead at memorials. And not once have I said, their bank account amounted to $1.2 million, or they left behind a Lexus and a nice house. What have I said? I have said stories of the wisdom, of the love, of the relationships, of the things they did, the hope they gave others. We are hope beyond our ownership. That's who we are, beloveds. And that is the task as we wander through our lives. To dig into who we are. It is not what we think we are. It is not what we do. It is not what people say of us. It is not what we have. It is the hopes that we sow. You remember the parable of the seed sower? Nod if you remember the seed sower. The sower seated on the rock, on the dry path, on the good soil. And on the good soil, the plants grew. We are seed sowers of hope when we extend wisdom to each other, when we extend generosity and compassion and love. But we first have to believe in hope. Hope that is born, as the poet said, of suffering. Hope that does not exist without suffering, as suffering does not exist without hope. The poem reminds us who we are. Ruben Alves says, "We must live by the love of what we will never see." It is a refusal to let the creative act be dissolved in immediate sense experience. Oh, we are so good at going for the immediate sense experience. My teenager is so good at the sense experience. But what of the commitment to the future? Such disciplined love, says the poet, is what has given prophets and revolutionaries and saints the courage to die for the future they envisioned. They make their own bodies the seed of their highest hope. In this time of Lent, in this bookend between the moment when we put ashes on some of you who came, and many who came, when we touched ash to the forehead and said, "Remember, you are dust, and dust you shall return to," you wept. Why? Because the question is who we are that you carry. From that bookend to the resurrection of Easter, the joy of the Spirit, there is a time to ponder, a time of deliberate contemplation. Who are you? And in part the answer is, you are hope in your being. You are the hope of others. You are hope beyond ownership. What can you do to create, to contemplate the love beyond all love, the hope that never dies, for a time of testing, a time of trial, a time of probation, a wandering in the wilderness, my friends, spiritual wanderers? You are the hope. And that is the answer. And that was a 15-minute sermon. Amen.